Speedland makes some high quality, top performance trail running shoes. A lot of people that try them fall in love. But are they overhyped? Is this just marketing or are they worth the price tag? Today I'm reviewing the Speedland GS PDX. I tested them hundreds of miles, including in 2 races of 100-mile ultramarathon, and I'm giving you my review today. Hi, Simon here. Welcome to my channel. I'm an ultra runner on my way to racing 100-mile ultra marathon. On this channel, you will also find a lot of tip video sharing my knowledge and my experience to help you get out there and have your own adventure. Today, we're reviewing the Speedland GS PDX. Trail running shoes, high-end shoes, performance shoes, and as with my other gear review video, I won't focus too much on the specifics or the specs and everything. You're smart, you can go on their webpage, you can figure out how much that weight exactly and what's the drop exactly. No, what I do instead is I test the shit out of these running shoes and I share my experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And for these shoes specifically, I use them actually quite a lot. I use them at Leadville 100-mile. I use them at Saddles 100-mile. I think I probably did another race, but I'm kind of blanking on it. So already just that is about 200 miles of racing. But also they quickly became my go-to shoes in training. And I explained when specifically I was using these shoes. But I easily put 200-300 miles in training in these shoes. So all in all, I probably ran something like 500 miles. And they're definitely getting at the end of their life. If you can see here, it's hard to see it to focus, but the tread under the shoe is basically shred at this point, but it's not because these shoes are not durable. So let's talk about what this shoe is. So this shoe really is a trail running shoes, but this is not really a technical shoe. It's perfect for trail, dirt road, gravel road. When it comes to super technical, that's not necessarily the product that you would go for even in the Speedland category. But these are high quality and high-end trail running shoes. This is performance shoes. Now, by performance, I don't know that I'm running any faster in these shoes. I'm definitely not running fast, but that's just me. But what really distinguishes them and what I think a lot of people enjoy with these shoes is that these are very cushy. These shoes, it feels like you're running on clouds. And I think a lot of people that really love the Speedland shoes, it's that feeling of running and minimizing the impact, especially on your heel. And that's something that, especially for long distance, we're talking ultra running, 50K, 100 mile, 200 mile, the impact gets bigger and bigger every step you're taking. And myself, this is an issue that I will often have, and you will hear me in my racing documentary sometimes complaining about feet pain, about heel pain, and that's going to be a problem during the run, but that's also going to be a problem in terms of recovery where it takes a little bit of time for my feet to get back to normal, to not be sore. So these shoes were absolutely great for that. This is very cushy. You can see that there's so much foam in there, and it really absorbed a lot of the shock. So when I was using them as my go-to shoes in training, that was partly for that. This summer I was racing so many races that my feet sometimes would be painful, and then I would switch very quickly to the Speedland to work on that. The other thing that I would mention is that, look, I put probably 500 miles on these shoes, potentially even more than that. And actually they look pretty good. Like the under the foot is getting a little bit ripped, but for the distance I put on these shoes, I want to say that they're very durable. And that's something that you need to keep in mind when we're going to talk about price tag. The other thing that really stand out for these shoes is the tightening system. They use this BOA system here, where it's very simple. It's not like your normal shoes, and just overall the design is a little bit funky. You see these shoes and you're thinking, what the hell is going on there? That's Speedland. I guess they decide to go outside of the box a little bit, which it takes maybe a day or two to kind of accept that it's different, but it's actually really interesting. So first of all, you don't have like the, I don't know the name in English, but the kind of tongue that you have here. This is just one piece of fabric, and then it will come over and it will tighten, and you can easily tighten these button. You press them, clap, and then it's a dial where you just tighten. And sure, I mean, we all know how to tie our shoes. That's something that we learn in, I guess, kindergarten or something like that. But it is important to mention that it's actually very practical that you can really fine tune the level of tightness that you have. And first is that it's very easy to just loosen it a little bit or tighten it a little bit. And why would you need that? Well, your size of your feet will change through times. When you're racing an ultra marathon, especially if it's hot, at least for me, and I'm sweating a lot, there's a little bit of swelling that can happen in your feet. And the typical recommendation is to go for a shoe size that is 0.5 more than what you would typically do. And that's partly because of that. And definitely with these shoes, you should do that. But the advantage is that you can tighten or loosen them very easily. It's also very practical if you do a shoe switch during your race. So at Leadville, for example, I didn't race the whole race in these shoes. I used these shoes and then I transitioned, I think it was to some Joe Nimble shoes, which I'll make a video about, which are also great shoes. And that's really quick. You just pop, loosen, remove the shoes, so much faster. And then when you tighten, same thing. So it's actually like a tiny thing really, but once you start using that, I think, or at least for me, I would never switch back to normal kind of tightening my shoes. It's a system that is very, very functional, very, very good. The fact that it's kind of one fabric also is interesting because that leaves a little bit less kind of crap coming in. And sometimes, you know, when you have the tongue here, if you tie your shoes a little bit too much or if your feet start swelling a little bit, it will create a pressure point or a pressure line on your feet, and that can be a little bit painful. So obviously that's not an issue for that. The comparison I would have to this is, and I know we're going to tangent, but that's me. I improvise a little bit the shoe review because I want to have like speaking from my heart. And the comparison I would have to this system is keyless cars or the knob instead of the keys that you insert in the car. The first time I saw that, I was like, okay, this is a gimmick. This is kind of silly a little bit. But now I'm like, wow, this is great. Like I just have to have the key in my pocket and I can start my car. Like this is fantastic. And it feels the same for that. Of course, I can go back to a car where I use the key to turn on the engine, just like I will tighten my shoes normally. But this is just like a little thing that I was like, wow, like this is really cool actually. So overall, great shoes. Now there's two things I still want to talk about. One is the thing that I don't necessarily love about these shoes. And then the second piece is when would I use these shoes? Because no shoes are perfect. So of course there are things that I would criticize about them. And there's situations specifically where I would say this is a great shoe for that. And some other situation I would say don't go for this shoe. So let's talk about the things that I don't necessarily love. The first one, I don't know if I love it or hate it, but the fabric is a little bit different. It's a little bit thick. And for races that were hot, I felt that it was not super breathable. Potentially also it's because the side here, I don't know if you can see, this is kind of, this is not like fabric. This is kind of water resistance. So it's not super breathable. So I think that because of this, like really the only space where you will, your feet will be breathing is kind of this area a little bit, and the fabric is a little bit thick. So I think when it's wet condition, I think when it's a little bit more cold condition, this is great. But potentially when it's really hot, not the best. You might have your feet getting wet a little bit. You might have blisters a little bit. Speaking of blister, all of our feet have different shapes. So that's something to keep in mind. That's just from my point of view. For me, the side here was rubbing a little bit on the pinky, which did lead to some blisters. Nothing major, but you know, that's something to keep in mind. Also, when we look at these shoes, I mean, one thing that is really striking when you talk about the trail running shoes, you look underneath, like what do we have? So first, you know, it's pretty flexible, so this is working fine. But if you look at the tread, sure, it's used up, but this is not the most aggressive that you will find. And it's sufficient for things like dirt road or non-technical trail, but if you're on something that is more muddy, does not go deep enough, at least in my mind. Or if it's something that is very much technical, it's rocks and it's slippery, this might not be great. So when it comes to technical trail running, and there's some example of phrase that I'm going to mention, I wouldn't necessarily go with that. But Speedland has shoes that are a little bit more mountain shoes, whereas this is something that would work a little bit better for something that is not necessarily technical, but you do have some quality in terms of this is not just straight up a running shoe. So it's kind of the hybrid model, which for a lot of ultra marathon is probably what you should be going for. The shoes are a little bit wide, and we're not just talking about where your feet is, but the cushioning is pretty wide, and that will lead to you bumping your toes potentially. I mean, if you're clumsy like me, I was bumping them a little bit more than I would typically. So when I'm doing something that is way more technical, I want to have a shoe that is a little bit slimmer, and it's not a big difference. Like, it's not something you can even see. Like, it's like maybe 1 millimeter on the side, but it makes a difference for me. And maybe if I ran a little bit more with these shoes, I wouldn't have noticed. But if you're switching, that's something to keep in mind. On the flip side though, something that is positive about that is I think the fact that it's a little bit wider at the bottom, especially towards the heel. Yeah, you might bump your feet and you might trip. However, I think it's stabilizing a little bit when you're landing. So if it was a little bit more narrow, you're more likely to roll your ankle. Whereas with this, I felt very stable, which related to the cloud kind of feeling is actually really good, but not necessarily a technical shoes. And finally, if we talk about technical shoes, so they're pretty water resistant, but the water will definitely sipping here. But if you touch here, this is very soft. So if you're thinking about a race that is much more rocky and you're gonna bump your feet no matter how hard you try, you're gonna bump them. This is not offering a lot of protection, so you're gonna hurt your toes a little bit. And the last thing to mention that a lot of people will bring up when we talk about Speedland, it's the price. People love these shoes, but they are on the pricier side. So obviously I'm biased. Speedland gave me these shoes, so for the one pair that was free, but I can reflect on, okay, is it worth the price tag that you see online? And the first thing to mention is that these shoes are pretty durable. So for 500 miles, these shoes are in really good shape. It's a great feeling shoe for sure, but you need to understand when to use it and when to use something that is a little bit more technical. So for me, I think I used them perfectly. Leadville was a great race for that. It's a lot of running. You need to have speed. It's long distance, but it's not exactly super technical. You're not facing like rocky terrains like I had at Tour des Géants, which was wet, or something like Hurt 100 Mile in the mud, or QMT, or there's so many races that I did last year that were in the mud, and these shoes would have been kind of terrible for that. However, a race like Leadville, absolutely great. For Saddles 100 Mile, I think that was really good that I had something very cushy, because it's a race where it's very common in Arizona. The trail that you have, it's not like the Northeast where you're running a little bit on dirt and it's kind of a softer ground. It's a lot of rock, and that can be really painful for your heel with a lot of time. So I think these shoes were actually really great for that. So what's my verdict of the Speedland GS PDX? I think they're great shoes, honestly. The value of it is a question for you. Is it worth the money or not? But I think it's really fun to try these shoes. Sometimes at Race Expo, they will have demo shoes that you can try and just kind of have a go at it. And you'll realize what I mean by, like, it feels like you're running on a cloud. I think they definitely have a place in my rotation, in shoe rotation, and particularly for me, it's actually for training. When I get out of a race and I want to get back to training as soon as possible, but I'm a little bit more sore, my joints are a little bit more painful, having a shoe like that is actually great. If I go race in the mountain, crazy mountain race, I'm not going to bring these shoes. I'm going to bring something else. And Speedland has other product that will be much more oriented for mountain racing, which I would love to test. So Speedland, if you're watching, please send me a pair. I would love to try these shoes because these shoes have a purpose. These shoes are great for what they're doing. So thanks for watching. I hope this review was helpful. As I mentioned, I don't focus so much on the detail or the specs of the shoes, but really how it felt and what's my impression of the shoe, that when you try them yourself, you have a sense of what to expect and when to use it versus when to not use it. If you appreciate this video, please leave a thumbs up, comment below, share with your friends, and see you next time.